He dropped the keys into his wife's brother's hand, smiling like it was generosity. Patricia Lane, 75, widow and retired professor, stood frozen in her own doorway. Her son, the boy she once carried on these very steps, spoke like a landlord evicting a stranger. By morning, the deed he bragged about had already shifted back into her name. She'd been mom her whole life. Now she was the owner he underestimated. And when his in-laws came to settle in, the locks answered before she had to. "I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates." He said, "We decided it made more sense for Melissa's parents to live here now." My ears rang. Lorraine had to double-check the GPS. The neighborhood was the same: sunlit palms, manicured lawns, the familiar slow curve of Desert Willow Lane. But as she pulled up to the villa's circular drive, her heart stuttered. A white SUV was parked in her usual spot. A U-Haul trailer, still half unpacked, sat by the curb. She hadn't told Kyle she was coming. This had been her house for nearly 30 years. She didn't need an invitation. The door opened before she could knock. Kyle stood there, looking winded like he'd just jogged from the back. His smile was forced. "Hey Mom, I wasn't expecting you." Lorraine took off her sunglasses slowly. Clearly, behind him she saw movement, unfamiliar voices echoing down the hall, a box being set down, laughter. She stepped inside. The scent hit first: cheap vanilla plug-ins, the kind Melissa liked. The sleek mid-century chairs she'd chosen years ago were gone, replaced by oversized faux leather recliners and gold-accented side tables. A woman she barely knew, Melissa's mother, passed by the kitchen archway holding a stack of linens. "Oh," she said brightly. "Lorraine, right? We're just getting settled. So sorry for the mess." Lorraine blinked. "Settled?" Kyle scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, okay. I was gonna call. Melissa and I decided it made more sense for her parents to live here now." Lorraine's ears rang. "You decided?" "They're getting older," Kyle said quickly. "They need the space more than you." The space, Lorraine's voice caught. "Kyle, this is my house." "Well, technically it was transferred a few weeks ago." She looked at him sharply. "You were still recovering from surgery," he mumbled. "You signed the updated forms, remember?" Her breath went cold. The power of attorney, granted temporarily after her hip replacement. She'd trusted him with it for emergencies. Not this. Melissa appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. "It's just paperwork, Lorraine. You'll always be welcome to visit." Lorraine stared at her. Melissa looked immaculate as always. Blowout pearls, painted smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. She took 2 steps backward, toward the door. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "I see." Kyle reached toward her. "It's not what it seems." "No?" Lorraine said calmly. "Because it seems like I've been evicted by my own son." "No one's evicting you," he said, exasperated. "You haven't lived here full-time in years." Lorraine didn't answer. She turned slowly, stepped back out into the heat. Her heels clicked once on the tile, then stopped. At the edge of the driveway she paused. The bougainvillea she planted with her late husband had been ripped out. In its place, artificial turf and a metal flamingo. She spoke without turning around. "Noted." Then she walked away. The throw pillow under her neck was too firm. The ceiling fan squeaked every 5th rotation. And the scent of eucalyptus oil from Dana's diffuser was starting to feel more like a memory trigger than a comfort. Lorraine stared at the plaster ceiling, listening to the soft tick of Dana's wall clock. 3:11 a.m. She was still awake. In the dim glow from the kitchen nightlight, Lorraine spotted the outlines of her suitcase, not even fully unpacked. One corner of it rested against the base of Dana's blue leather couch. This wasn't a visit. This was exile. Dana had insisted she stay. "As long as you need. No question." But Lorraine felt the weight of displacement in every polite breakfast conversation and overly enthusiastic offer of coffee. Her pride ached more than her hip ever had. It had been 6 days since Kyle's bombshell. 6 days since her home, The villa had been handed off like a favor, like a casserole dish being returned. On the third day she had walked by it, slowly, head low. The villa had changed. The porch was cluttered with wicker furniture from some budget outlet, and the mailbox now bore a new nameplate, the Whitleys, Melissa's parents. The window dressings, heavy, polyester too shiny, fluttered in the breeze from a poorly installed AC unit. Cheap changes. Loud ones. The kind that screamed, "We're in charge now." Lorraine didn't cry. She just kept walking. Later that night, Dana tried again. "Honey, it's time. Lower up. At least talk to someone." But Lorraine only shook her head. Not yet, because some foolish part of her still believed Kyle might come back to his senses. Might knock on Dana's door and say, "Mom, I didn't know what I was doing. I'll fix it." Instead, she watched as he posted poolside photos on social media. Beers with Melissa's father, hashtags about family first. The ache hardened. One afternoon, Lorraine pulled out a battered file folder from her storage box. It was labeled in her own handwriting, "Villa Documents, Legacy Trust." She hadn't looked at these in years. Inside were the original blueprints, hand-marked with changes she and Marcus had made, the kitchen island she'd insisted on, the sunroom addition with its south-facing windows. She ran her hand over a faded note in the margin. "If you're happy, I'm happy." Marcus had passed 12 years ago, but his calm voice still lived in her bones. Lorraine opened the deed. Her name was still on the trust, wasn't it? She traced each section, read line by line, and then again. It didn't feel like paper. It felt like fuel. She stood suddenly and reached for her purse, her laptop, a fresh notepad. Dana looked up from her crossword. "Where you headed?" "Downtown," Lorraine said. "Recorder's office." Dana blinked. "Now?" "No," Lorraine said, pausing. "Tomorrow, first thing." That night, as she sat with a mug of herbal tea and the file open beside her, Lorraine whispered to the empty living room. "You never learned who you were dealing with," she whispers. "You never learned who you were dealing with. Ye changed the deed. Yes, but not all the strings that held it together." The waiting room of Prescott and Mark's Law was still paneled in the same dark walnut Lorraine had recommended for their lobby 10 years ago. Back when she was still designing high-end interiors, back when Kyle still visited every Sunday. Now she was the one waiting, folders pressed to her chest, heart steady but taut. "Lorraine Callahan," a voice called. She stood. James Prescott had aged, less hair, thicker glasses, but his handshake still carried the weight of quiet precision. "I was sorry to hear about Marcus," he said gently, gesturing for her to follow. "Let's see what we're dealing with." In his office, Lorraine laid out the documents like a surgical kit: blueprints, trust paperwork, deed copies, power of attorney forms. She spoke efficiently, without sentiment. Prescott listened, brows twitching as she outlined the sequence of events. When she mentioned the deed transfer done while she was recovering from hip surgery, his posture changed. "You gave Kyle temporary power of attorney, but you didn't revoke it in writing." "I didn't think I had to," she said. "It was for emergencies, medical bill, not to hand over my house like a bottle of wine." He tapped a pen against his desk, flipping to a section of the trust. "You're lucky, Lorraine. The villa was under a legacy trust established by Marcus. And while the deed was transferred, this," he pointed to a clause highlighted in yellow, "was never amended. Your name's still here. That means you retained partial interest and legal standing." Lorraine exhaled, a slow, heavy breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So I can fight this." He nodded. "It's murky, but not impossible, especially if we can show bad faith and coercion." She leaned forward. "What do you need from me?" "Paper, emails, texts, any proof Kyle acted without proper intent or was pressured." Let's build a timeline. Lorraine didn't wait. That afternoon, she began combing her digital archives. She found the email Kyle sent while she was still hospitalized. Need to handle some quick paperwork for you. Nothing big. She found Melissa's text to him days later. Make sure it's clean. We don't want her name popping up later. She printed everything, labeled each page, numbered them in sequence. She drove to the Maricopa County Recorder's office herself. The clerk barely looked up until Lorraine requested a copy of the official title change and date stamp. Do you need certified? The woman asked. Lorraine smiled. Absolutely. Back in her car she sat for a moment, gripping the manila envelope like a rope. They'd thought they were clever. That age meant weakness. That silence meant surrender. But Lorraine hadn't spent 30 years building homes, managing contracts, and navigating luxury real estate for nothing. She understood the architecture of power, and she had just found the crack in their foundation. That night she called Dana and said only, "We have a door." Dana, ever the loyal friend, replied, "Then let's kick it open." Her attorney smiles, saying, "We have a door. Now let's kick it open." They filed false peace. I filed real paperwork. And because Melissa once said choral tones were a little outdated, James Prescott clicked send on the filing. The petition was titled Formal Contestation of Deed Transfer Under Conditions of Elder Coercion. Beneath it, Lorraine's name. Still legal. They'll be served by tomorrow, he said, standing. And until this is resolved, we're freezing any sale, rental, or modification of the villa or its guest house. Your name gives us that authority. Within 48 hours, Melissa's family got their letters, one at their Airbnb-hosted guest house, one hand-delivered to the villa, and one sent to Kyle's work address. The reaction came fast. Kyle showed up pounding on Dana's door, his face flushed, eyes wild. Lorraine didn't flinch. "Why are you doing this to us?" he shouted, as Dana stood nearby, arms crossed. Lorraine opened the door just wide enough to meet his gaze. "No, Kyle, why did you do this to me?" He opened his mouth, but she shut the door before he could answer. Later that evening, Dana poured her a glass of Cabernet and said, "You didn't raise a monster, but you raised someone too weak to stop one." Lorraine didn't cry. She just said, "Not anymore." Lorraine didn't cry. She just said, "Not anymore." That same night she opened Airbnb on her iPad and searched the city. There it was, modern desert guest Casita, brand new. Melissa's father had listed it with photos Lorraine herself had once staged. She flagged it, cited legal dispute. Attached the county recorder's note and attorney's cease and desist. The listing was removed within 24 hours. Melissa posted a cryptic Instagram story, "Some people can't handle passing the torch. It's called letting go, sweetie." A photo of the villa's new wallpaper, cheap gold foil. Lorraine screen captured it, added it to her file. James called later that day, "We hit a nerve. They're spiraling." "I don't want revenge," Lorraine said calmly. "I want restoration." As she hung up, Lorraine glanced around. Dana's guest room, temporary furniture, blank white walls, no garden. Then she pulled out a folder and began sketching. Not legal briefs. Floor plans. She wasn't just reclaiming what was stolen. She was designing what came next. Lorraine has the Airbnb listing flagged and shut down using her retained legal tie to the trust. Lorraine, Melissa posts online. "Some people can't handle passing the torch. They thought I'd be embarrassed. I was just busy." She didn't post statements or correct rumors. She got a haircut. She chose silence not as surrender, but as a strategy. Her attorney said the less public mud she flung, the more credibility she held in court. But truthfully, she wasn't even tempted. The noise didn't interest her anymore. Melissa's family had their version of events, shared in vague captions and tight smiles at backyard barbecues. Lorraine had time, a bank account, and facts. She spent her mornings at a coffee shop across from the courthouse, quietly transferring her investments into a new portfolio. A discreet financial advisor helped her build a protective trust, one her name alone controlled. inaccessible to Kyle or any potential heirs until proven responsible. It's not about punishment, she told the advisor. It's about peace. He nodded. Peace costs money. You're investing wisely. She changed her mailing address, cut off the joint storage unit Kyle had kept under her name. With every step, Lorraine felt her roots shift deeper, but also freer. Melissa blocked her on every platform. Kyle stopped responding to texts. Not even a reply when she sent him a picture of her wedding ring, Marcus's ring, which Kyle had claimed he'd someday inherit. It now sat in a safety deposit box. You're not being vindictive, Dana said one evening, as they watered plants on the patio. You're being away. Lorraine smiled faintly. I spent years teaching people how to furnish homes, but I forgot to teach them how to honor them. The invitation came unexpectedly. An email from a local women's retreat coordinator. We heard about your advocacy and recent legal action. Would you consider speaking on legacy and reinvention? Lorraine laughed out loud, not bitter, just surprised. Then she typed, I'd be honored. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of 30 women in folding chairs, the desert wind curling around their feet. Her talk wasn't theatrical. It was measured, calm, clear. She didn't name Kyle or Melissa, but when she said, I gave everything, and they took the deed, heads nodded. When she said, I'm not reclaiming a house, I'm reclaiming my spine, hands clasped in silent recognition. Afterward, a woman in a floral shawl came up quietly. Your words, they were mine once too. Thank you for saying them out loud. Lorraine squeezed her hand. We're louder together. She almost didn't notice the note slipped into the feedback envelope until she opened it at home. Neat cursive. Can I attend anonymously? It's Melissa's mother. Please don't tell her. Lorraine folded the note, tapped it once against the counter. Some people wanted to learn. Others wanted to spy. She poured herself a glass of water, not wine, and stood on the porch, watching the sun settle over the desert. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. The retreat organizer says, someone's asking to attend anonymously. It's Melissa's mother. Funny how the ones who steal your house still want to hear you speak. She scanned the crowd, not for Melissa's mother specifically, but for any trace of her posture, her haircut, that tight-lipped composure. His face flushed, and for a moment she saw the boy in him, the one who used to cry over lost toys, over skinned knees. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I don't know who I am to you anymore. She stared at him, then softly but firmly, Am I still your mother? Kyle swallowed hard, looked away. Exactly. She rose from the bench, the conversation heavy in her bones. You're asking the wrong question, she said. Kyle looked up. Lorraine didn't stop walking. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply kept moving forward, past the past, toward a life that no longer asked her to shrink for anyone else's comfort. Kyle asks, Am I still your son? She doesn't answer. I lost my house. So I built a home. Lorraine signed the final paperwork with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed anyone's approval to move forward. The new property sat just outside Sedona, a sun-soaked adobe bungalow with chipped stucco, tangled rose bushes, and a sagging porch swing that squeaked like it had secrets. To anyone else, it was a fixer-upper. To Lorraine, it was a clean slate, untouched by betrayal. Untouched by Kyle. She walked through each room barefoot, her fingers brushing over peeling paint and scuffed wood floors. She imagined where her writing desk would go, which wall would get her late husband's framed sketches, where she might teach a small design class around a vintage table with mismatched chairs. It smelled of dust, pine, and possibility. Dana drove up on the second morning with a bag of lemon scones and a bottle of chilled rosé. They sat on overturned paint cans, eating breakfast and planning wallpaper like teenagers. You didn't just land on your feet, Dana. You built new ones. Lorraine smiled. No more looking backward. She filled the garden beds with native flowers, terracotta pots of herbs, and a small plaque that read, Grown, not given. Meanwhile, her weekly column, House, Heart and Home, had gone from local newsletter to national syndication. Women from all corners of the country wrote in, telling stories about sons who disappeared after inheritance arguments, daughters who guilted them into draining retirement accounts, siblings who'd sold homes before the ink was dry on probate. Lorraine didn't respond to all of them, but she read every word. Every sentence reminded her she wasn't alone, and more importantly, she wasn't crazy for drawing a line. She started volunteering at a legal aid clinic downtown, sitting in quiet offices with other seniors who had similar stories, but no voice. She helped them organize documents, understand power of attorney limits, draft letters. "I'm not a lawyer," she'd say, "but I've been through the fire. I can walk you to the door." Then came the letter. Melissa's mother had hired a lawyer. They were claiming Lorraine's public narrative had caused reputational damage and undue emotional distress. Dana snorted when she read it. "The woman stole your home and now wants damages because you said the word boundaries in a microphone." Lorraine handed the letter to her own attorney, who drafted a 2-sentence reply. "All claims are categorically denied. We look forward to addressing this fully in court." It was never about winning, it was about not shrinking anymore. That weekend, Lorraine opened her garden to her first small gathering, a handful of women, 3 bottles of wine, folding chairs under string lights. They talked about grief, family, reinvention. "I miss the version of me who didn't flinch every time the phone rang," one woman said. "You're not gone," Lorraine said. "You're just buried. Let's dig." They laughed. And for once it didn't hurt to laugh. Melissa's mother tries to sue Lorraine for reputational damage. Lorraine's attorney mails them a simple reply, "See you in court." They showed up confident. I showed up with proof. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix felt sterile, all polished stone, long hallways, and muted conversations that echoed like distant memories. Lorraine sat in the waiting area beside her attorney, a calm expression on her face, documents neatly organized in her lap. Melissa's family arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and overconfidence. Melissa wore tailored beige. Her father adjusted gold cufflinks. Her mother dabbed her lips with a gloss that matched her blazer. All of them looked like they were arriving for a real estate pitch, not a legal hearing. Kyle trailed behind, shoulders slumped, eyes darting toward Lorraine, but she didn't look back. Inside the courtroom, the judge, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, called both parties forward. Lorraine's attorney opened with precision, submitting the chain of documents that showed how the villa's ownership had been transferred using a limited, expired power of attorney. He walked the court through the timeline of Lorraine's hip surgery recovery and the exact dates Kyle had acted without her consent. Then came the clincher. Lorraine's late husband's trust. A clause in the trust clearly stated that any property could not be sold, transferred, or reassigned without dual signatures, one of which had to be hers. Melissa's attorney stood up, a little too smug. "Your Honor, the family made significant upgrades to the home. Landscaping, new furniture, a complete kitchen renovation. These were investments made in good faith. They deserve equity." The judge didn't blink. "So you're saying they spent money on a home they didn't legally own?" Melissa's father cleared his throat loudly, shifting in his seat. Kyle was called to the stand. Lorraine didn't flinch. He looked nervous, fidgeted. When asked to explain the decision to transfer the deed, he said, "It was always going to be ours eventually." Lorraine's attorney stood. "Did your mother give you written consent to transfer the deed?" Kyle looked down. "Not exactly." "Did you understand that the power of attorney was temporary?" "I wasn't sure." "Did you or your wife or her parents ever ask Lorraine directly if she was okay with losing the house?" Silence. "Answer the question, please." Kyle finally muttered, "No." The judge leaned back in his chair. "This is starting to look less like a misunderstanding and more like opportunism." Lorraine remained still, watching everything without triumph. She wasn't here to gloat. She was here to restore what was stolen. After a brief recess, the judge returned with his preliminary ruling, a temporary injunction preventing any further transfer, sale, or rental of the property. Melissa's family would need to vacate the guest house within 30 days. and pending a full civil trial, Lorraine was granted partial restoration of her name on the title, with the legal right to file for full ownership. Melissa's face went pale. Her father looked like he'd swallowed his own tie. But it was Melissa who broke first. As they exited the courtroom, she turned to Kyle, voice low but furious. "You said this would be easy. You said she wouldn't fight back." Kyle's mouth opened, then closed. For once he had no answer. Lorraine passed them in the hallway. Neither of them looked at her. Melissa screams at Kyle in the courthouse hallway, "You were supposed to protect us." Once the money dried up, so did the loyalty. Lorraine didn't bother clicking it. She already knew the house was falling apart in every way that mattered. A local real estate agent sent her a message anyway. "Villa's going cold." They tried pricing it like a designer showcase, but words gotten around. Lorraine sipped her tea by the window of her modest Sedona home and didn't reply. There was no satisfaction in their unraveling, but there was truth. Kyle had moved out 3 days after the court hearing, apparently into a short-term apartment complex near Tempe. Rumors floated back to Lorraine through mutual acquaintances, tension, fights, accusation. Melissa's parents furious they'd invested in something now legally uncertain. Melissa blaming Kyle for not pushing harder. Kyle blaming everyone but himself. Lorraine stayed quiet, tending to her lavender bushes and answering emails about her column. The newest one, titled "Inheritance is Not a Right, It's a Relationship," had gone unexpectedly viral. Messages poured in from across the country. Stories of disowned mothers, power of attorney abuses, retirement savings drained in the name of family obligation. One woman wrote, "Your words helped me say no. Thank you." Lorraine read that sentence 3 times before closing her laptop and breathing in the soft, grounding scent of rosemary from her garden. She hadn't just reclaimed her property. She'd reclaimed her voice. Meanwhile, Melissa's family scrambled. They tried to rent out the villa again, but after the Airbnb fiasco and the court's injunction, no booking platforms would allow it. The house stood awkwardly half-furnished, its once grand living room now echoing with silence. Kyle reached out once, a voicemail with no words, just 30 seconds of background static and a sigh. Lorraine deleted it. She wasn't angry anymore. She spent her mornings teaching part-time at a local design center, her afternoons consulting pro bono for seniors navigating estate issues. Her weekends were filled with laughter from women she'd met through her legal aid outreach, women rebuilding, re-choosing, and refusing to be erased. She never once drove back past the villa. She didn't need to. Then came the call. A law firm, national, respected, specializing in elder exploitation. They'd read about her story in a legal journal, asked if she'd be interested in joining a class action suit aimed at financial abuse through deceptive power of attorney transfers. Lorraine paused. She wasn't litigious by nature, but she remembered the look in Melissa's eyes, entitlement wearing, and Kyle spineless, willing to trade his mother's legacy for comfort. "Yes," she said into the phone. "Tell me what you need." The next morning, she opened a fresh journal. On the first page she wrote, "They didn't just try to take the villa. They tried to convince me I didn't deserve to fight for it." She closed the cover. A law firm offers to represent her in a class action suit for elder exploitation victims. Not every story ends in reunion, but some stories restart without permission. Lorraine kept her mornings slow now. Herbal tea steeping on the windowsill, soft jazz humming in the background, hands in the soil before emails. Her Sedona house wasn't grand, but it breathed with her. That was more than she could say for the villa she once designed, once fought for, once walked away from. A young hummingbird flitted above her rosemary bush as she opened the latest letter from the class action firm. More plaintiffs were joining. The case was moving forward. Quietly, powerfully, like roots under stone. In the evenings, she hosted a rotating group of women, some from her legal aid work, others who'd found her through the column. They brought wine, casseroles, stories and truth. None of them wore masks. No one tried to keep the peace. Peace wasn't something they'd inherited. It was something they were building, one conversation at a time. She began mentoring 3 younger women, all recently divorced, all burned by financial betrayal. One of them, a 35-year-old named Ray, said, "You make me believe I can own something again, not just a house, but a life." Lorraine smiled. That's the real estate. Then, one evening, her inbox chimed. From Kyle Harper, subject, "I don't expect anything," but she almost didn't open it. But something in her stilled fingers did. It was a long email, meandering, conflicted. Part apology, part justification, part confession. He wrote about pressure, about shame, about watching everything slip through his fingers and not knowing how to fix it. "I thought if I gave Melissa's parents what they wanted, they'd love me," he wrote. "And if they loved me, maybe she would too." He didn't ask for forgiveness. That was new. Lorraine read the message once, then again, her chest tightened, not with rage, but with sorrow. Not for what he'd done, for how little he'd known her. She waited 3 days before replying. "Kyle, when you know better, you owe better. I'm glad you're beginning to know. If you want to be in my life again, here are the terms. No money, no manipulation, no reliving the past. If you can meet me there, fine. If not, that's okay too. I'm no longer available for guilt-based relationships." Mom. She didn't hear back for weeks. And then one afternoon, while planting sage out back, her neighbor knocked on the gate. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Looks official." A man in a sport coat stood holding a badge and a camera crew not far behind. "We're working on a documentary series on financial autonomy for seniors. Your column and your class action story, it's making waves. Would you consider an interview?" Lorraine wiped her hands on her gardening apron. For a moment she just looked around at her raised beds, her grapevine trellis, the welcome mat that no one had to earn. Then she said, "I won't name names. I won't drag anyone." "Of course," the man replied. "We want the survivor's story, not the scandal." She nodded. "Then you can film me in the garden." A producer contacts her about adapting her essays into a docu-series. The villa sat dark now. Empty windows, echoes of decision. The driveway was overgrown. Lorraine didn't pull in. She parked across the street, behind her sunglasses and silence. The house, her house, once stood like a stranger wearing her clothes. The stucco shimmered a tacky shade of beige, and someone had added wrought iron sconces that looked like clearance finds. A cracked plastic flamingo stood guard near the front path. She exhaled slowly. It had been months since the court decision. Long enough for legal dust to settle. Long enough for Melissa's family to lose their grip. A red and white for sale sign leaned at a crooked angle near the mailbox. She already knew the villa was listed. No fanfare. No staging. Priced to move fast. Melissa's parents had folded. Kyle had disappeared again. Lorraine had no intention of reclaiming it. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't want to. "It's a tomb now," she whispered. The place had been theirs, hers and Marcus's, built from grit and taste and decades of restraint. Every tile in the kitchen had been laid after a fight about color palettes. Every beam in the vaulted ceiling still echoed their laughter, or had, before it was overwritten by greed. She closed her eyes and let it go again. Later that week, an email pinged in from an unknown sender. Subject, "Your name came up." "Hi Lorraine. I recently bought a property in Scottsdale. During closing, your name appeared in some of the older design records and trust documents. The realtor mentioned you were the original owner and designer of the villa. We love the bones of the place, but it feels tense, like it has a story. Would you consider walking through it with me? Not as the former owner, just as a consultant." Maya Feld, interior architect. Lorraine stared at the screen. Her tea cooled beside her. Consultant, not mother, not litigant, not victim. She typed back, "Only if you're open to honesty." Maya replied 10 minutes later, "That's the only kind we want." 2 days later, Lorraine stood once more at the villa's threshold, this time holding a notepad, not a deed. Maya, young and thoughtful, met her at the door. "We'd love your eyes on how to honor the history without reliving it." Lorraine walked through the space like tracing an old wound. Her fingers brushed the fireplace mantle she once sanded herself. The guest room, Melissa's parents' former domain, was stripped bare. The garden was dead, but the bones, Still good. This house, Maya said softly, has a strange energy, like it was taken from someone who really loved it. Lorraine didn't flinch. It was, and it took itself back. They stood in silence for a while. Then Lorraine looked up. Start with light. New windows, let it breathe again. Maya nodded and jotted it down. Lorraine left without looking back a second time. She didn't need to. The ghost had been exorcised. The new owner says, this house has a strange energy, like it was taken from someone who really loved it. I didn't need closure. I needed a clean page. No makeup artist. No retakes. Just a single take. And her words. The documentary was nearly done. Her voice, layered across each episode like silk on stone, had become the quiet spine of the story. Her face, never shown. The producers agreed to anonymity. The message was the focus. Not the mother who lost her house, but the woman who found her power. Each segment was themed: coercion, silence, legal gray zones, maternal guilt, and finally, the power of opting out. In the last shoot, the director asked, is there anything you'd like to say to women watching this who've been betrayed by their own children? Lorraine didn't hesitate. Don't confuse forgiveness with access. You can love someone and still lock the door. Click. Done. The docu-series aired regionally, first on PBS, then picked up by a larger streaming network, under the title, Silent Deeds, The Price of Inheritance. Viewer feedback flooded in. Emails, letters, DMs. A woman from Idaho wrote, I thought I was alone. I thought I was cruel. I didn't know I was allowed to say no. Lorraine printed it out and tacked it to her studio wall. She no longer referred to the villa in interviews. That chapter had closed. The real story was never the house. It was the mythology of obligation that surrounded it. That was what she'd burned down. She established the Reframe Grant, small scholarships for women 50 and over, restarting their lives after family estrangement or financial upheaval. Applications surged. At sunrise one Tuesday, she found a bouquet waiting by the garden gate. Sunflowers, her favorite. No card. Dana found the envelope tucked inside the stems. Kyle's handwriting. Lorraine opened it carefully. Inside, only a blank note and a pressed daisy. She walked inside, pulled out a mason jar, and gently placed the flowers in water. Then she drove them straight to the local hospice center. No note. No explanation. Some flowers weren't meant to be brought home. That afternoon, she sat at her desk and drafted her final column, giving it back without going back. I used to think motherhood was a contract I couldn't break, that no matter how my heart was handled, I had to stay at the table. But I've learned that love can still be love, even if it doesn't fund, fix, or forgive without limits. I gave everything once. I give differently now. And no, I don't miss the house. I miss who I was before I believed I owed it to anyone. She hit send. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived, handwritten, thick envelope. No return address. Inside, a crisp sheet of paper and elegant practiced cursive. It read, Lorraine, I know I was awful, but I was scared. We were broke. We made mistakes. And I don't expect anything from you anymore. Not money, not trust, but if there's any way to make it right, I'd like to try. Melissa. Lorraine read it once, then again. She didn't cry. She just placed it under a paperweight and went back to pruning her lavender bush. Some attempts arrive late. Some confessions echo more than they repair. But they count. She signs it, presses the pen down, and walks outside. It read, I know I was awful, but I was scared. We were broke. Maybe she'd written 5 drafts. Maybe this was the one that finally didn't sound like a pitch. I know I was awful. It was the first time Melissa had admitted anything, even vaguely resembling accountability. That line alone had weighed. But then came the follow-up. We were broke. As if desperation was a disinfectant for betrayal. Lorraine folded the letter gently and slid it back into its envelope. She didn't shred it, she didn't frame it, she placed it in her filing drawer under correspondence, pending nothing. A week passed, no follow-up, no flowers, no knock at the door, just the quiet hush of boundaries holding. Then a text came from an unknown number. Melissa, I'm not asking for anything, not even forgiveness, but if there's ever a way to talk, for Logan's sake, maybe. Lorraine stared at the screen. Logan, that boy had her eyes, her husband's dimples. She had crocheted him a blanket when he was born. A soft gray and robin's egg blue. She didn't know if he still had it. She closed the text without replying. Instead, she called her therapist. They spoke for an hour. Then she called her lawyer. And then, finally, she journaled until her hand cramped. The next morning, she wrote a letter, short, sharp, and unclouded. Melissa, I accept your apology, but trust is not restored by words. If you're serious about healing, there's a support group for families navigating financial betrayal. Link is below. Lorraine, she sealed it, addressed it, and left it in the mailbox before she could second-guess herself. Then she called her estate attorney. I'd like to update the will again, she said. No more contingencies, no soft edges, no room for backpedals disguised as reconciliation. Lorraine transferred the remainder of her assets, property, royalties, investments, into a foundation for women over 50 rebuilding their lives post-divorce, post-widowhood, or post-family exploitation. A name had already come to her the moment she held Melissa's letter. The Reclaim Project. Its mission would be simple. Support not given, support chosen. She left 2 letters with her attorney. The first would go to Kyle. A clean, factual explanation. Nothing cruel, just a full account of decisions made and reasons why. The second, heavier, more personal, was for Melissa. It read, for the day you finally understand, not when you apologize, not when you feel sad, but when you truly understand what you did and what it cost all of us. Not just the house, but the blueprint of trust, torn at the seams. When that day comes, read this. If it never comes, let it stay sealed. She signed it, pressed the pen down into the page until it left an indent. Then she walked outside, not away, just forward. Lorraine does not reconnect. She rewrites her will, leaving everything to a women's foundation. She signs it, presses the pen down, and walks outside. They thought they took the house, but the legacy, that stayed with me. Lorraine's garden hummed with soft wind and late afternoon sunlight. Lavender rose bowed gently. Bees made their slow, determined rounds. A small table was set for 4 lemon water, fresh-baked scones, and a pitcher of sun tea sweating gently into its napkin. 3 women sat with her, students from her finance workshop at the Women's Center. One had just finalized her divorce after 20 years. Another was rebuilding credit. The youngest, just 51, said she hadn't made a decision without a man in her ear since high school. Lorraine listened, nodded, shared her own lessons. Not from bitterness, from blueprint. This, she said, is what we pass down. Not walls, not deeds, strength. They laughed. One of them said, you should be on TV or something. Lorraine smiled. I kind of... The docu-series aired the following Sunday night. 5 episodes. Anonymous voiceovers. Stylized reenactments. No names. No faces. Still, people knew. Emails flooded in. From North Carolina, Oregon, Ohio. Mothers, aunts, women who'd co-signed loans and been ghosted. Women who'd been called selfish for saying no. Women who still cried into dinner napkins they bought for weddings they weren't invited to. Lorraine replied to as many as she could. A few she printed and tucked into her journal. One woman had written, my son called me toxic for setting boundaries, but your voice helped me remember, I'm allowed to exist. In her new house, smaller, warmer, hers, Lorraine framed a photo by the front door. Not the villa, not even her old family home, just a shot of her hands, planting that first row of rosemary in Sedona soil. She called the photo Inheritance, because that's what it really was. Not what you leave behind in a will, but what you teach someone to grow with their own two hands. And somehow that was peace too. Not spite, just space. Melissa tried once more. Another vague letter. No envelope this time. Lorraine didn't open it. She dropped it in the fire pit with a quiet resolve. Some things didn't need to be read to be understood. The villa eventually sold to a tech couple from California. They gutted it, repainted it, dove gray, and installed minimalist lighting fixtures. Lorraine got a message from the new owner one afternoon. We found your design notes tucked behind a cabinet. If you ever want to walk through and see what we've done, you're welcome. She went. Politely, calmly, she walked every room. She smiled at the open beams she once chose with Marcus. She ran her fingers along the stone archway she'd sourced from a reclaimed church in Spain. She stood in the center of the kitchen, eyes closed. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. That night she sat under the stars with a cup of tea and opened her journal. She wrote one final line. They took the deed. I kept the foundation. And then she smiled. Not for them, for her. She writes one final line in her journal. They took the deed. I kept the foundation.